It's our pleasure to host Jeremy Rasmussen today here. Jeremy is a cybersecurity expert with over 24 years of experience. He has experience in developing secure communication systems and providing cybersecurity consulting services throughout the world. And today he will be talking about the changing cybersecurity threatscape. Over to you, Jeremy. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, awesome. And can you see my screen? Hopefully. All right. Very good. Well, let's see. I can move this. What I'm going to do is share my slides rather than my screen. There we go. So thank you for the introduction. I am the Chief Technology Officer and a partner at Avocode Cybersecurity and Compliance in Tampa, Florida. And that, it's more than 24 years. It's almost 30 years now developing cybersecurity solutions and doing R&D for both government and commercial clients. My fun side job for the last 20 years is also adjunct faculty at the University of South Florida in Tampa, where we founded the USF White Hatters Computer Security Club, which is, I think, kind of a sister club to the Purdue Security Club. I know some of our alumni are there at Purdue now, and if you guys have come down and done some capture the flag competitions and so forth. So, and I know we gave some advice and mentoring to getting that club started some years ago. And my own teaching background is in cryptography, network security, mobile and wireless security, digital forensics, ethical hacking, and so forth. So I've been doing that for a long time. And our company is one that does manage programs for other companies. So you'll have a lot of companies out there, especially in what I would call the mid-market range, which is, like $50 million in sales up to $1 billion. They know they need help with cybersecurity. They don't have anybody in-house that can do the work. It's hard to find the people now. There's something like a 4 million person worldwide shortage of cybersecurity talent around. So finding the right people and getting them in-house and so forth is very difficult. So you could outsource that whole thing to a company like ours that can manage it from top to bottom. And I'll talk a little bit later about what are all the things you should be doing for any organization to try to combat these emerging threats they're going to be talking about. Yes, it's funny to see the empty room there. Last time I was there, this is what I looked like. I don't know what I was doing. I do remember I had a really bad cold at the time, so I was constantly blowing my nose or whatever. And yeah, I was carrying a couple of extra pounds there, I think. But I was more actively doing, boots on the ground, hands-on hacking stuff back then. I'm more of a business development facing role these days, although I still get my hands dirty doing a bit of technical as well. I'm kind of the big picture person. I have a deep background and 30 years experience in looking at every shape and size of system, and so understanding what the security needs are and recommending solutions is kind of my forte now. So here's what we're going to talk about today. How has the world kind of changed from an IT security standpoint since COVID-19 and all the work from home that's been happening, and what is the impact of that on infrastructures? How do we handle that now? It's called zero trust, but what does that mean exactly? I went to Black Hat briefings out in Las Vegas a few weeks ago. Nice to get back, in person to some of these events, DEF CON and so forth. There's only about half as many people as usual, but there's more one-on-one intimate conversations, so it wasn't all bad. But talking to some of the vendors there at Black Hat, there wasn't even any agreement on what the term XDR means. You might have heard of EDR, endpoint detection response, and you might have heard of NDR, network detection response. And then there's this idea of XDR, which is, across the board, so endpoint, network, cloud, everything. that's not always the agreed upon definition. So you have these vendors out there trying to sell solutions and solve a problem where the problem space is not even very well defined. I think that it's the same situation with zero trust. And so we'll get into that, what I think it means. And then others might disagree with me, but this is my take on it. Talking about software, trusted software that you invite into your environment from these third-party vendors, and you're expecting it to be trusted, but not so much anymore, as we've learned from the SolarWinds attack, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In working with ransomware and understanding ransomware and having to do digital forensic cleanups over the last few years, and working with partners who actually have to negotiate ransomware payments from these attack groups, with a Bitcoin payment and so forth. We've learned some things about ransomware and how it launches and how they land it in environments, which might surprise you, of the initial attack vectors that we will get into. Another area I've been kind of studying up on recently and writing some blog posts and white papers on is, it seems to be a rampant issue of SSL VPN vulnerabilities in these firewalls. So I'll talk about what that issue is and why that's such a big deal. Because a lot of people ask me, they're like, oh, what about AI and machine learning? What is that doing for cyber? We'll touch on that for a bit and see, what is how does that change the threatscape? Are we seeing more and more like AI-based attacks, and get into that. And then talk a little bit about what are the best practices people should be doing to combat all of these threats. As time permits at the end, I'll open it up to questions. And I think we'll also, maybe if there's any questions as we're going along, maybe we'll just bring those to my attention. I'll try to answer them as we go along. Just raise your hand or whatever, or enter something into the question box. So first, looking at this post-COVID world, there was this kind of traditional view before COVID of, and by the way, this traditional view was definitely going away long before this. I would say even since the early 2000s, the traditional view has been, eroded in favor of, modern architectures where the majority of traffic, is not behind the firewall anymore. So, but there was this, traditional notion or viewpoint of a network and of your IT infrastructure as being clearly defined where the perimeter is. The majority of traffic is behind the firewall. You could apply enterprise policies across the board. And you had kind of well-defined security challenges. Just keep people out and then you're pretty good. Well, as you know, from cloud computing, from using software as a service, online, it's difficult to even find people's data, like where it belongs anymore. When we come in and do an assessment, the first thing we try to do is discover where their critical data are. So I'm just taking an example of a professional sports team that we've worked with, the Major League Baseball team, not the hometown Rays, not anybody local. I won't say who it was, but it's a very prominent MLB team. And the first thing we did is, where's your data? Some of it was on premises, some of it was in a data center, some of it was in a cloud, some of it was in the software as a service solution. So payroll had their own SaaS that they were using. Finance had their own, ticketing had their own. Actually, the ticketing was funny because they initially thought they were running everything on a server in their environment. It turned out it was in a cloud-based server, which then interfaced through an API connector into like Ticketmaster server. They had these like Moneyball guys, the analytics folks that they brought in from Google to run the numbers on, what players should they go after to try to get a trade for or draft, who reach base, have the highest on base percentage and things like that. These guys, so everybody else was on Office 365 and Exchange, and these guys like Google, so they're on G Suite and Google Drive. So, I mean, it was just, there was no centralized IT visibility and control for any of this, right? The data was scattered everywhere. There's unstructured data, sensitive financials, as well as personally identifiable information, just kind of everywhere. And that's what we see in the lower left-hand corner of the screen is everything is happening outside the firewall now. And just finding the data, first of all, is the big challenge. And then figuring out how to lock it down and secure it is the second part of that. As we're doing right now with Zoom or GoToMeeting or Teams, a lot of your communications, a lot of your, chat, your messaging and everything is going to be outside the traditionally protected perimeter now. I just noticed, what was it? The Department of Defense had its own web and chat services and messaging services through DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency. They're going to deprecate that now in favor of moving everything to commercial off the shelf, like Microsoft Teams. Thought that was an interesting move for them. So there's a lot of security challenges that I guess they feel that Office 365 and Microsoft and Teams and Azure have addressed. I know that there is a certification called FedRAMP that is anybody that wants to do business with the federal government in the cloud has to go through this accreditation process. And I know that Azure has done that. So, and Microsoft done that for their environment. So long and short is you've got this emerging view that requires a new type of approach. And the new approach is called zero trust. And here's Jeremy's take on zero trust, which might be slightly at odds with what other people think it is. But my idea of zero trust is that I assume somebody's already inside my environment. And how can I limit them to what they can get to, make sure they can't get to my crown jewels of data, that they can't make any negative changes that are going to affect the security margin of my enterprise. So to do that, and I also want to kick them out, right? So they can't, and fix the problem that let them get in. So that's how I think of zero trust. It's just like, the Navy has to build ships that are going to reach their destination, even if they spring a leak, right? So there has to be ways to cordon off or seal the breached parts of the ship or bail them out so that it can continue on its journey and get to where it's going. In the same way, that's kind of the new normal for these environments. Everything's happening outside the firewall. So I want to have micro segmentation in place, which means if they get into one thing, they can't then leverage that foothold to move laterally, get into other things in my environment. I want to add single sign-on with multi-factor authentication everywhere. So having a single sign-on solution is great because then you really only have to have one password along with a multi-factor thing like on some kind of Okta or Duo or other authenticator app, Google, Microsoft on your phone that you have to then click a positive sign off or enter some code that's changing. And you want to have your provisioning all done through that single sign-on portal as well, because then again, you can create long and strong passwords and multi-factor authentication for everything you're getting into. You want to have XDR, which is EDR, managed endpoint detection and response agents and monitoring everywhere. So you have to put sensors out there that collect data and report up to a centralized aggregation server. And then you want to run correlation rules on that to generate security alerts. We'll come back to that in a minute. The other things that I would call, that need to be monitored and need to be accounted for are shadow IT. So bringing under centralized visibility and control things you might not have thought of where the company runs. For example, social media. A business will run a good portion of their operations on social media. They'll use LinkedIn for HR and hiring. They'll use Twitter and Facebook for public relations and promotions. I've seen Twitter used for help desk support before, right? So the question is, are you monitoring that? Is it under centralized IT visibility and control? Is it under multi-factor authentication? And the answer is a lot of times no. A lot of times it's being run by the PR department, and they're security amateurs. They don't know anything about security. And so you'll see account takeovers, account impersonations, and then embarrassing stuff happens for the company where they're posting stuff they didn't mean to post. So that's just one area that needs to be brought under that control and may not traditionally have been included in a security plan. All right, so in the past, if you had a trust relationship with a software vendor, let's just take, for example, Zoom, right, or Microsoft Teams. You're assuming, hopefully, that they're not, stealing your private data, that they're not planting Trojan horses in your environment that will allow attackers to do remote code execution and so forth. This is the contract that you have with them. Has anybody ever stopped to read all the terms of services in those software agreements? I mean, a lot of it is saying you're not going to do anything bad to them, like reverse engineer their software and misuse it, but they don't really promise that they're not going to do anything bad to you. And in the case of SolarWinds, I don't know if you're familiar with this attack that took place late in 2020, but it's a very wide-ranging attack. What happened was a company called Mandiant FireEye, which is a top-rated security company, determined that there was an attack in their own environment and that some Russian APT, Advanced Persistent Threat Group, had come in and stolen some of their security tools that they use for red teaming, pen testing. And when they figured out how it happened, it turned out that it was through this a Trojanized backdoor in their SolarWinds software. SolarWinds, if you're not familiar, is some network management and health and status reporting software. Very good, software code. Software program that a lot of people use. Something like 30,000 customers they had, and a good number of them, something like 1,800, had downloaded a infected update to the software. So it started with they called it Sunspot. Sunspot, the APT actors had gotten into the DevOps environment of SolarWinds and had actually planted this process there, some kind of backdoor, so that whenever they kicked off a build, they would look for like a Microsoft Visual Studio process running, and they would inject their code in there, and they would do things like suppress error messages and compiler warnings, just in case just to make sure they didn't see what was going on. And they actually built a backdoor into this code that was going out for people that are updating their SolarWinds software. Well, what were they doing? They were dropping in a dropper. In the first case was Sunburst, which was a customized tool to allow command and control access. And we're going to get into this in a little bit, but there's a basic game any attacker plays, and that's surveillance on your target, finding an initial vulnerability that you can exploit, gaining persistence for later, gathering passwords and credentials, things like that, moving laterally. But one of the key things that always happens is establishing command and control, because that allows them to basically have taken over the environment and continue to manipulate the environment as long as they like. The other droppers were dropping a tool called Cobalt Strike. If you're not familiar with that, it's an exploit framework. So it's actually a commercial off-the-shelf tool. You're like, well, couldn't you just look for the use of that tool in your environment? Maybe, but they probably made a wares version of it, which means they had like source code, and then they modified it slightly and created a different binary that might have a different signature than you might typically see for Cobalt Strike. There's still ways to actually look for the running Cobalt Strike process, but an exploit framework is used by penetration testers to go try to red team a system and try to get into it and see if you can exploit vulnerabilities. And it offers a great, after you've achieved an exploit and you have a shell, it really allows you to maintain persistence to do all kinds of commands and interacting with the environment as a remote access terminal. So that was the reason for that. But my question is, how did they initially land that sunspot into the DevOps environment of SolarWinds? And I've seen a lot of things about how sunspot worked and all these droppers and the fallout from it, but I've never seen anything reported about how they initially got into the SolarWinds environment. And I think it was because maybe they didn't have adequate security monitoring in place themselves. That's just my theory, but I'll come back and theorize on that some more. So I got a question for the audience. In talking about like Maze ransomware, which is one of the more common types of ransomware we've seen over the last couple of years, very annoying. We've actually had to dig out a number of customers from Maze ransomware attacks. I mentioned in this case, we have a partner that we give. I don't want to handle ransom, right? I mean, we'll help you rebuild, restore, recover. We'll help you put in proactive controls. And by the way, none of our managed services customers, knock on wood, have ever been hit with ransomware, because we'll see one of these indicators of compromise early enough in the game that we can stop it and kick the intruder out before it becomes a ransom situation. But this was a third-party referral to us in this case from, I think, a lawyer, and they and we had to engage with somebody to negotiate a decryption key for the environment. Reason being, unfortunately, they didn't have good backups in place. So that when their primary servers got encrypted, their backups also got encrypted. they thought they were backing up to the cloud. They were only backing up to a local network area storage, and so they lost everything. All their financials going back for 2 years. They couldn't ship product. They couldn't receive payments. They couldn't do anything. So they had to pay, I think it was close to $500,000 to get a decrypt key for their environment. So my question for you, what do you think the initial vector of attack is for most ransomware? Anybody, we're going to vote on that. Do you think it's service misconfiguration, phishing and social engineering, or remote desktop misconfiguration? Well, I think a lot of people might guess B, right? Because I think people are the weakest link. But in fact, in working with this third party who's done the most ransomware negotiations over the last 2 years of basically anybody, we found out it was remote access misconfiguration. So remote desktop, and setting that up improperly. You're basically opening a pipeline into your environment. So this is with, TeamViewer or GoToMyPC or, RDP port 3389. Any of those are basically the same thing, where if you allow that connection to come in from anywhere, you haven't whitelisted it to only a trusted known IP. And if you're allowing, unlimited connection attempts, they can try brute force password guessing, or they can try what's called credential stuffing, where they go look in the dark web, or they look on they get a cache of passwords from some other website or domain that's been breached, and then they try those out again, because people tend to reuse passwords. Against all advice, they do that. And so through the remote access misconfiguration, that's how they're getting in most of the time. And I rounded these off a little bit. I think it's more like 62.5% for remote access, and roughly a third or 30% through phishing and social engineering, tricking somebody to click on a link in an email, tricking somebody into going to a fake site that looks like the real one, and downloading malware, or entering their credentials somewhere in the wrong place. And then 10% of unpatched or missing patches or deprecated operating systems and so forth. Just an example of that might be some things I've seen out there, running an old version of Microsoft Exchange. So a lot of people have migrated into like Office 365 online in the cloud and so forth. But a lot of people still run an old Exchange server, and they might forget to patch that. They might patch their Windows and and all those things associated with that, but they might have forgotten to go patch their Exchange. And there's been an awful lot of exchange attacks of late. That's been in the news, you know, quite often lately. Another thing we see, you know, if we're ever doing red teaming or penetration testing, we're going to always beeline for any old unsupported operating systems because they're very easy to exploit. They can't be updated. So I'm talking about Windows Server 2003, Windows 7, and some other things that are still out there in wide proliferation in many places. So those are the ways people get in. Why is this ransomware such a big pain in the you know what? Well, these are really good business people. You might have heard this before, but they typically have, you know, good customer service, right? They will, you know, if you pay, they'll get you your decrypt key because they want to make sure they don't get the reputation that, you know, they're not going to give you the key if you pay because that's bad for business. They also are utilizing multiple extortion methods. You know, backups is just one way to combat ransomware, but that does absolutely nothing about them threatening to dox you, which is putting all your private information out there on the web and embarrassing you, or even reporting you to, say, authorities. If you're a publicly traded company, the Commerce Department might fine you for allowing your customer data to be exploited. So they'll threaten you with the double extortion. Number one, we won't let you have your data back at all unless you pay us for the decrypt key. And number two, you know, if you think you can recover from backups, we're just going to put all your private data out there anyway and just embarrass you, and you'll take your reputational hit. You know, another thing is they have very successful affiliate programs. So they'll hire a team of penetration testers, red teamers to come in and find a system that they can then exploit, and then they'll hand the system over to the ransomware gang, which will then pay them some money and say, we'll give you some percentage of whatever we recover, you know, on the ransom. So it's a big business now, you know, multi-billion dollars. And, you know, at the end, we could talk some more about, you know, how does that look, you know, with the Russian oligarchs and all that stuff. Let's see, moving on. All right, so this is what we were talking about earlier. I don't know if you cover this in any of your classes, but I would look up the MITRE attack framework. So some years ago, I think Lockheed Martin or somebody else came up with a cyber kill chain idea. And by the way, this stuff's not, you know, new. This is how attackers have been getting into systems for years. If you go back to reading, I think 1999 or 2000, Hacking Exposed, George McClure and Stuart Kurtz, George Kurtz, and some of these guys, Stuart McClure, I can't remember all the guys that were on that book, but they talked about this very thing. And what we just said earlier, you're always going to be looking around for a way to get in. You're going to get a foothold of initial access through either a phishing social engineering, remote desktop misconfiguration, or, you know, taking advantage of some public-facing system. You know, there's other ways too. Like you've seen the one before where, you know, you put some malware on a USB memory stick, and then you write on there, oh, here's the CEO's salary or whatever, and you leave it in the parking lot. Somebody comes and picks it up, puts it in their computer, and now they've launched, you know, malware on their system. There's different ways to get that initial access, and then you want to gain, you know, persistence or backdoor for later on. You want to escalate privileges because you don't want to just be an unprivileged user. You want to have admin or root level privileges. Defense evasion means you're going to try to shut down their antivirus or turn off any kind of analysis tools. I saw recently that the one of the ransomware types, I can't remember which one it was. I think it was the REvil, whatever it was. Would actually, if it saw that you tried to turn on IDA Pro, which is a reverse engineering, you know, binary analysis tool, it would try to kill that instance or the process from running to keep it from, you know, keep you from running that tool. Credential access, this is basically, you know, scraping memory for passwords. One of the tools you see out there a lot is Mimikatz. It's used for that. Lateral movement is moving around within the environment to try to spread from computer to computer. Collection is, going and finding important data. So they're looking for product plans, intellectual property, financials, personal identifiable data, credit card numbers, whatever. And then they're going to, as we said, establish command and control to an external site that's going to allow them to keep updating, getting more stuff. Exfiltrating the data is, stealing all the data out to a cloud or some other place. And then finally, impact is, doing bad stuff like encrypting all your files, deleting files, shutting down systems, denial of service. So as you can see on the right, here's just some examples of how, Maze ransomware does what it does. It creates persistence by scheduling a batch file in your startup folder. It turns off, dynamic analysis tools like I said before. I think it's IDA Pro. It scrapes passwords using Mimikatz. If you're not familiar with that tool, Mimikatz is really powerful. Whenever you log into a Windows system, it caches your user ID and password in plain text in RAM. And so that's a tool that will scrape RAM memory to go get passwords out of there. PS exec and PowerShell are tools, admin tools that are used for moving laterally and to execute, commands over the network inside a Microsoft environment, Windows environment. For command and control, we could find hard-coded IPs through in the code for HTTP communication. So it would look like basically regular web communications and traffic on port 80, but it's really belies the fact that there's commands being sent back and forth. For staging the data to be stolen, we always see them use tools like 7-Zip or WinRAR, or and then WinSCP for FTPing data out to the cloud. As a little nasty side thing, it deletes your shadow volume. So if you're not familiar with shadow volumes on Windows, what they do is they try to create restore points in snapshots, so that if you ever had the blue screen of death, after you install a program and you're like, oh man, I wish I could get back to a state where before I blue screen. Well, you can by restoring, booting to safe mode and then restoring the system OS back to where you were before you blue screen. Well, you can't do that if they delete your shadow volumes and turn off the shadow volume service. You can't, very hard to recover. And then they do things like stop your database service so they can encrypt the database server. I mean, really, really nasty. But these are all things that can be watched for. That's what we do as a company, and there's other companies out there that will do this. And there's, certainly organizations can run their own security operations services, but you got to find the people, right? You're going to have to. You need at least, I would say, 2 people per shift around the clock, 24/7. So that's like 6 people. Plus, you need, experienced threat hunters. There's usually tiers of analysts. So tier 1 is like the eyes on glass people watching the matrix, 24/7, and then tier 2 are the people that come in. They're more advanced, supervisory, and determine if an escalation needs to be made when something is found. And then tier 3 are your advanced threat hunters who will, figure out how to stop the problem, get to the bottom of it, and eradicate it. So you really need all that stuff. And so, as you can imagine, most companies, even a $1 billion company, is probably not going to put out the money for an 8 to 10 person security operations team. When you can get the equivalent of that for a fraction of the cost from some outsourced provider, right? So it's usually a good idea for these companies to just outsource that. All right, so this is a notional idea of what one client might look like. So here we have the analysts that are wherever they are. They're in a security operations center, or they might be working remote. They're all connecting into a VSOC. You have an updated threat feed. You're getting logs from O365 and Azure and AWS and any cloud. You're getting logs from on-premises servers, virtualization servers, any kind of financial software they're running. Every site is going to have its own security stack with a firewall, endpoint protection, email security, and all that stuff. This can all be fed in. The logs of this can be fed into this one aggregation server, and then you run these like pre-configured correlation rules. It gets updated with a threat feed every 15 minutes or so, and it bubbles up these alerts that these people then determine if they need to be escalated. The alerts are going to be the things that we just showed on the previous slide. It's an alert about, oh, I just saw somebody going to a fake phishing website. We can see that in real time because we see them get redirected to a domain that looks exactly like the regular real domain, but it's off by like one character. And it's an HTTP, so we can see them inputting their credentials into this site that looks like the real one, but it's fake. We can see command and control traffic happening, from these known, blacklisted sites. We can see people trying to do privilege escalation and turn off, antivirus, and all these things have a signature of the IOC, the indicator of compromise, that allows us to stop it as early as possible in the kill chain before it gets to the bottom of the chain there, the impact level. All right, so quickly moving on topics here. One of the hot kind of things I've been researching lately, and because we've been seeing it come up in some of our digital forensics incident response work, is SSL VPNs. So the background is, FortiGate, Fortinet, and some others put out some firewall updates recently, and all of these firewalls have it, whether you're using WatchGuard, Checkpoint, Fortinet, Palo Alto, Cisco, whatever you're using, Pulse Secure, they all want to have some kind of web interface that allows you to do remote configuration of the firewall. And they all want to have some sort of SSL VPN capability, because as opposed to a layer 2 VPN, SSL is very easy to manage and integrate. It's all part of your web services stack. And so these firewall manufacturers will try to put together a web services interface. And what they do is they usually go back to some old version of Apache, right? They just take some old, 2001, 2002 era Apache and modify it to be part of their firewall user interface. Well, as you can imagine, people that play capture the flag and do this stuff for a living and find bugs see these SSL VPNs as slot machines from a bug bounty perspective. Now, the people I'm talking about, Orange Tsai and Mechang, are like the best of the best, right? They Orange just won Pwn to Own, which is if you go to CanSec West security conference, they have a Pwn to Own competition where people bring their 0 days for Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Chrome, Firefox, whatever, and these vendors will pay them money for showing how they can own or compromise these systems in real time. So these are unannounced, undiscovered 0-day attacks that people bring with them. And Orange and his team brought like a 0-day for Microsoft Exchange server this year and completely owned it, and ended up winning a big money and the most points in the Pwn to Own competition. They are also they play in the DEF CON Capture the Flag, which is considered the world championship of hacking. So they kind of turned their hobby, which is finding security vulnerabilities, into a way that pays off, a real nice salary for them, or so. SSL VPN is why it's a big deal. It's found in 500,000 servers on the internet. That's just the FortiGate SSL VPN. That's one brand. Some of the examples are, there's the Twitter SSL VPN, and there's the Marvel Comics SSL VPN. So they're out there to be found. You probably could go on Shodan, which is like a vulnerability search engine, and find a bunch of these out there. but basically they treated it like a CTF challenge. So they started out, they first got, a firewall, and they saw the firewall image as just this big binary blob with all the symbols stripped. Well, that's very, very much like a CTF challenge, right? A CTF challenge, capture flag, is where they give you some binary, they don't give you any source code for it, and you have to figure out how to exploit it to create a buffer overflow, or a stack or heap overflow, and then redirect execution so you can get a shell. Once you have a shell, then you go look for the flag or whatever it is, the part of the challenge that has a flag. Well, this is the very same thing. All you got to do is figure out how to mount that image, get a shell, and then go exploring within the Unix environments or Linux or whatever it is, coded in. So what they did is they did that very thing. They figured out how to mount the image. They were able to do some reverse engineering of it with IDA Pro and some other tools, and figured out how to land a buffer overflow. And they won a bug bounty for that. The patch for this FortiGate SSL VPN vulnerability was issued like a year ago, and yet we still had a customer, again, not a managed service customer of ours, but a referral from a third party that was using that deprecated firewall software. And that's another lesson, is like, when you're going to do your updates, don't just think Windows updates. Remember, you've got firewall firmware that needs to be updated on a regular basis, server firmware, virtualization software, remote access software, server access software. These are all kind of shadow areas of updates that people don't consider sometimes when they're just thinking about, patching Windows. So there's lots of other places that need to be patched as well, and as it has to be part of your vulnerability management program. So what they found is people would add these native script language extensions, which cause lots of problems. It was based on very, very old Apache code, as I mentioned. They were able to do directory traversal attacks, which means that they could create a buffer overflow, escape out, // out of the directory they're in into another directory, which would allow them to then read files. One of the files they found is, for whatever reason, the SSL VPN implementation that was part of the Linux stack was saving anybody who had logged into the firewall. It would save their user ID and password in plain text in the logs. So they just had to figure out how to get to that. And they were able to do an exploitation, a heap overflow, before authentication, where they would just simply send some certain crafted strings to the firewall and get it into a state where they could crash it and allow them to go read this file that would give them the passwords. And as I said, this customer we were doing the forensics for hadn't updated their software, their firewall firmware. So when we were trying to help them clean up from this, this ransomware attack, we kept seeing the attacker getting back into their system. And we're like, man, we changed everything. We thought we kicked them out. And we finally figured out it was from the fact that they were exploiting the firewall VPN service. So that's why I was like, man, this is a huge issue that's out there. And something I would say we see another one of these, issues coming up every few months. So keep your eye out for it. I think I'm going to quickly move through this so I can get to the questions part. But a lot of people ask, what can we do with AI and cybersecurity? And as you know, if you're taking any classes in this, AI is mimicking human abilities to analyze data, learn, recognize objects, make decisions, solve problems, and so forth. So what we hear out there is, oh man, you've got to have AI to be able to combat AI. And I hear this from some of the AI vendors. There's some really good tools out there, like Darktrace is one that you might have heard about that does kind of anomalous intrusion detection. So whereas I was showing you SIM before security information event management, which is based on rules and signatures and looking for specific attacks that we've seen before. An AI-based intrusion detection system is going to more look for patternless or anomalous types of behaviors. So it's going to kind of understand the steady state of an environment, and then if it ever sees any perturbation or behavior that's out of range, then it will schedule an alert. And so we hear from these AI vendors that, oh man, you've got to have our AI because people are attacking with AI systems. But the AI reality is that seen really any evidence of adversarial attacks in the wild. Those are more just there's no concrete evidence of any of these APT or ransomware gangs using AI and machine learning attacks. That's not to say they can't or they won't, or that it's not coming. I'm just saying I kind of haven't seen it myself here. Again, I'm working with mid-market enterprises. That's the sweet spot for my company, and maybe APT, if they have anything in the machine learning capability, they're not going to use that on such a company. They're going to save it for going after nation states, attacking national secrets, going after the really big guns where they can steal very valuable intellectual property. Who knows? But we just haven't seen it too much ourselves. What is the real value proposition is that it does see things faster than humans, and it can really go after the low-hanging fruit. It can do crunch numbers fast. So a few years ago at DEF CON, which is a hacker conference in Las Vegas, I attend just about every year, they had the Cyber Grand Challenge, which was a DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency sponsored challenge where they invited teams to come in and create robots, if you will, artificial intelligence or programs to be able to do cyber attack and defense. So they had systems that they had to try to protect themselves and determine if somebody else was attacking their systems and try to defend. And they also had systems that they could attack, they could attack each other and try to find exploits and then gain, capture flags and gain points. So the winner of all that was Mayhem, which was the Carnegie Mellon team. And I actually saw Mayhem in the Smithsonian after that. It was pretty awesome. Those little those boxes up on the stage were the actual competitors, and they were autonomous. The winner, Mayhem, actually got to go fight against humans in the human capture the flag competition the next day. It finished in last place, but it did show that there was a lot of potential for utilizing machine learning for solving these problems. We're going to see it a lot more in the future. A recommended read for you if you want to get into cybersecurity and want to understand the mindset of some of these great ethical hackers that are out there. That's a copy of it you can find. You can get online. It's okay. They initially put it out free of charge and allowed you to download it in a PDF format. You can buy it too, I guess, if you wanted to donate or contribute to the cause. You can get it on Amazon, but I think you get a free copy out there in a lot of places. Anyway, a lot of the experts say the same basic thing, which is good security comes from good security people, not from a shiny box that does stuff, right? So AI, I don't see as replacing humans at this point, human analysts. I see it as a force multiplier for trained analysts. It can crunch a lot of data. It can help us narrow down problem spaces. And you're still going to need people that can make sense of the alerts and follow up on the alerts and close out the alerts. But and I also would very much hesitate in allowing automated remediation or patching. It is available to some extent, what they call self-healing networks or auto-resilient networks. I think I would just be worried about that because I've seen in the past that a system where you just apply controls without really testing them out and making sure they're working properly is a system you're gonna brick. You're gonna brick that system and break it and make it unusable. Anybody that's ever starting in this field, if you ever find yourself in a role where you're going to have to implement controls and address these emerging threats, you need to have a plan in place. You're going to need to assess your organization's posture, establish continuous monitoring, as I said before, SIMSOC, and also train people to be aware and not to be the weakest link. So having a plan means executive leadership buy-in and developing, a real plan with actions and milestones and working against that plan. One of the big drivers we've seen lately is cyber breach insurance. Isn't that interesting? So cyber breach insurance was supposed to be this safety net, this safety blanket, whatever you want to call it, that would keep you, like if you made mistakes, it's okay. We've got our cyber breach insurance. It'll cover us in case we ever, have any denial of service or lost data or whatever. It'll kick in and it'll pay out. What people are getting, they're getting their cyber breach insurance renewal notices now and finding out their premiums have gone up 4, 5, 6 times. And they're like, holy moly, this is really pricey now. We need to do something about it. And the insurance companies have kind of wised up and the underwriting has changed so that they're not just going to give out policies and they're not going to cover you for as much if you don't have the basics in place. That was the issue. A lot of people would fill out these applications and you're supposed to have X, Y, and Z in place to show that you have due diligence, and they didn't really have it in place. So they would get breached, and then they may not get the payout if they didn't have in place what they're supposed to have in place. So all of this is driving price, and you've got to have this stuff in place to get insurance anymore. Assessments are things you do on a regular basis, either scanning for vulnerabilities from an external standpoint, as an attacker might from the internet, or inside your environment by placing, vulnerability scanners in there and looking for missing patches and misconfigurations. You also want to show compliance against a best practices framework, such as the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework for Infrastructure, Critical Infrastructure Protection, or the Center for Internet Security Top 20, or if you're, processing credit cards, PCI DSS. There's any number of standards out there. ISO 27001 is another one that are best practices for your environment, and you want to have an objective standard to measure yourself against. You don't want to just say, well, we think we're doing the right things without, what are you doing the right things against? These are objective standards that you can utilize. As I mentioned before, there's always these new threats coming out. There's even the issue of you can't even trust your quote trusted software anymore. So you have to have layers of security in place. You have to always be watching. Assumption of breach, I say, is a new normal. Assume somebody's already in your environment, how quickly you can detect that they're there and kick them out and fix the hole so that it can't happen again. That's the new normal. This is borne out by the NIST cybersecurity framework. There's basically 5 parts in there: identify your data, enact protections, proactive defenses like encryption and multi-factor authentication and so forth. But then that's only about 20 or 30% of the cybersecurity controls in that framework. The rest of it is all detection, response, and recovery. So detection is detecting when an intruder is there. Response is kicking them out, constraining what they can do and making sure they're eradicated from the environment. And then recovery is fixing the issues so it doesn't happen again. That's how we operate now, because as the defenders, we have to defend 1,000 ways into the castle. And as we already said before, it's not a castle, it's more like a amoeba, it's a blob everywhere. And doing the defense is very difficult. So we're going to make mistakes. How quickly you can detect, respond, and recover, those are the keys to good security these days. And then finally, making sure people are trained, making sure they're empowered as the first line of defense. They can subvert everything else we're doing. We can have great firewalls, endpoint protection, monitoring, and everything, but I can't keep somebody from giving out information over the phone. And we've seen it before where somebody gets called up from the outside and they're like, hey, we need, the boss wants to go get gift cards for people, and you need to run to, Walgreens or CVS and buy some gift cards, scratch off the numbers and give them to me so I can, so the boss can give out these, these recognition awards. And the people go and do it. Now, there's not any kind of cybersecurity protection I can put in place for that other than training people not to fall victim to such attacks. So training, education, awareness are the key. When we first phish a company or an organization, we usually can get them, we get about 30% of the people to fall for, as victims. But once we train the people, we can get that down to about 2 or 3%. So there's definitely things you can do through training. All right, so that's a lot of information in a short amount of time. I do want to open it up to some Q&A. So the question from the audience is, how does your security team position itself in relation to privacy engineers with GDPR, CCPA, and other data privacy legislation? Assume it's become even more important to know where the user data is and how to scrub it if needed. Yeah, absolutely. Privacy and security go hand in hand, right? Security is what gives privacy legislation and policies its teeth, right? And there's a lot of considerations there. So GDPR is the General Data Privacy Regulation of the European Union. CCPA is California Consumer Privacy Act. Again, one of the most strictest and most, I guess, onerous or whatever you would call it, privacy regulations in the U.S., along with Nevada and New York are also have enacted some state laws, and there's 17 other states that have pending legislation in this regard. Absolutely, one of the first things we want to do is in data discovery is understand where the data are. So we have tools and solutions now that can go and scrub, spider through an entire environment and look for unstructured data. Now, structured data, you often, you kind of know where that is, right? It's in a database server, and you know how that exists. But but unstructured data, that's much harder to find because it can be in emails, it can be in presentations, it can be in little Excel spreadsheets, it can be in staged data that's getting ready to go into the database. It could be all over the place on people's desktops, on their hard drives, in the cloud. And so finding that data and getting control over it is super important. We do have methods for that, and we can do what's called metadata tagging. So once we discover where that data exists and resides, we can put a label in there that says, hey, this is GDPR data. Then you know how to treat it in the environment. If it's in a place where it's not supposed to be on somebody's desktop, you can eradicate it there, leave a stub and say, hey, this has been moved over to the GDPR place. Then the GDPR folder can have special access controls, multi-factor authentication and monitoring to make sure you're doing data rights management on that. You can also apply this metadata tagging to what's called DLP, data loss prevention, which is a solution that keeps the data from exiting the environment without going through a secure channel, such as an encrypted envelope. So that's a good question. Those go hand in hand, and we definitely have to work with those privacy folks. Any other questions? How would you recommend somebody learn ethical hacking or red teaming? Funny you should ask, right, Joel? As a matter of fact, we're doing some red teaming training through Purdue CERIAS for another organization right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a seminar section where we talk about some red teaming techniques, and then we're going to have a little capture the flag exercise or competition to test out the skills of the people participating. So I'd say that's how I'd recommend doing it. Get involved in CTFs, capture the flag. There's online ones that run all the time. So there's websites, kind of hack this site websites that will allow you to try out your skills. And they'll usually start you out with some low-hanging fruit, some easy challenges, and then you're going to have to learn more and more to work your way up to the harder and harder challenges. And there's different types of skills you need to pick up. Networking skills, how to use your command line, how to use a terminal to SSH connect to other servers and run Netcat and Nmap and other tools like that. Those are not necessarily, I don't know if you're picking up those skills or not in your classes. If not, there are things you can pick up on your own through self-study and screen time. There's web exploitation things, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, cross-site request forgery, and things like that. You can figure out how to do. There's websites that will train you on that kind of stuff. So I would say, outside the classroom, you can join the Purdue Security, ethical hacking club and get involved with CTFs with them, or you can do it on your own through these websites that offer, ethical hacking challenges. And that's how you're going to hone your skills outside the classroom. In the classroom, we can only give you so much in terms of theory, lab exercises, and things like that. But it's your own screen time that's going to help you improve those red teaming skills. Any other questions? Yeah, I'll put up, we have our own, USF has its own, our White Hatters Club has its own CTF practice range. I can put up a copy of that. Let's see if I can find it. Keep asking questions if you have any. Well, let's see. Yeah, I found it. Try this one out from USF. If you ever have time, you can create an account there and try out our hacking website. Well, with that, I guess, and no other questions. Thanks for having me again, as always. I'll be here again 12 years from now for my next session.
Let's make it 6. Let's make it 6.
Okay.
Actually, let's make it a year from now. That'd be awesome. With the evolution of the industry and the things that you're working on, Jeremy, you would be welcome back anytime to give a talk. We appreciate you taking your time out of your very busy schedule to share your thoughts, not only with our students who are taking this 4-credit class, but by the thousands who turn in each week or view our recordings in the years to come. So those of you who are interested to hear what Jeremy had to talk about 12 years ago, you can go look up that old video as well. I'm not sure if I had the opportunity to introduce you at that time, but
yes, you did, Joel.
Okay,
it is you. So we get to see Joel from 12 years ago. Also.
Like you, I had a little bit more hair up top and less hair down here, and had a few more pounds on me then. So with that, we are at the time. Again, Jeremy, thank you very much. And to our class and participants, we'll see you again next week at this time. Have a great evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right, cheers.